Everyone's talking about the wrong thing. They analyze my speed, 5/100ths of a second to complete a punch. They study my power, a 1-inch punch launching a 200-pound man across the room. They try to replicate my techniques, my training, my physical achievements, but they're missing the entire point. I once had a student who trained for years to match my physical capabilities. He practiced the same techniques thousands of times. He followed the same exercise regime. He even tried to eat the same foods. And you know what? He became incredibly skilled. But he never truly understood what made me different. You see, while others were perfecting their punches, I was questioning why we punch that way at all. In 1964, I faced a challenge that exposed this fundamental difference. Another martial artist claimed his style was superior. The martial arts world expected a physical battle. Instead, they got something that shook their foundations. I questioned the very existence of style itself. Why confine yourself to one way of thinking? Why accept arbitrary limits? This wasn't just philosophical thinking. This mental shift led me to create something entirely new. Jeet Kune Do. Not another style, but an approach that transcended traditional boundaries. Think about this. While other martial artists trained to master their style, I trained to break free from the very concept of style. While they defended their traditions, I challenged every assumption, tested every theory, and discarded anything that didn't stand up to reality. The consequences were immediate. Criticism, rejection, threats from traditional masters. But this different way of thinking, this relentless questioning, this refusal to accept limitations, it didn't just change my martial arts, it transformed everything about how I approached life itself. The revolution wasn't in my fists or my feet, it was in my mind. And that's where the real story begins. Most people don't know how to question. They ask, how do I do this technique? And when they get an answer, they stop. That's superficial questioning. That's mental laziness. I developed a different approach. When someone showed me a technique, I wouldn't just ask how to do it. I would ask, why does this movement start here and not there? What happens if we change the angle? Why this distance? Why this stance? What principles make this work? What happens when those principles break down? Each answer bred 5 new questions. Each explanation demanded deeper investigation. I remember confronting a traditional Wing Chun master about the basic stance. He said, "This is the way it must be done." I asked why. He said, "Because this is how it has been done for generations." I asked, "But what happens when I do this?" And demonstrated a counter. He had no answer. That's when I realized most people mistake repetition for truth. True questioning requires courage. It means looking at a technique you've practiced for years and being willing to dismantle it completely. It means facing the discomfort of uncertainty. When I questioned the traditional horse stance, I wasn't just questioning a posture. I was questioning centuries of accepted wisdom. But here's what I discovered. The truth can withstand questioning. Only falsehood requires the protection of tradition. I developed what I call the hierarchy of questioning. Level 1, how does it work? Level 2, why does it work? Level 3, under what conditions does it fail? Level 4, what hidden assumptions are we making? Level 5, how can we break through these assumptions? Most martial artists never get past level 1. Some reach level 2. Almost none go further. Take the basic punch. Everyone knows how to throw a punch. But ask them why the power generates from the hip, they stumble. Ask them to prove it's the most efficient method, they quote Ask them to challenge their own understanding. They become defensive. But true mastery isn't about defending what you know. It's about being willing to dismantle it and build something better. This isn't just about martial arts. This is about how you approach understanding itself. When I directed films, I questioned every conventional camera angle. When I taught students, I questioned every traditional teaching method. Each question peeled away layers of assumptions until we reached something real, something true, something that could be tested and proven. The difference between superficial and deep questioning is like the difference between scratching the surface and mining for gold. You have to dig. You have to get your hands dirty. You have to be willing to discard everything you think you know. Because the moment you think you have all the answers is the moment you stop growing. In martial arts, there's a disease that's almost universal. Theoretical knowledge without practical proof. I've seen masters who can speak for hours about chi energy and ancient wisdom, but put them in a real fight. Their theories shatter like glass against concrete. I discovered this harsh reality in Oakland, 1964. A challenge match opened my eyes. My opponent was skilled in traditional techniques, had won tournaments, knew all the forms. But in those 3 minutes, I saw his decades of theory crumble against simple, effective reality. It wasn't about who knew more techniques. It was about what actually worked. This led me to develop what I call functional truth. The idea is simple. Reality is the final judge, not tradition, not theory, not what some ancient book says. If it works, it has truth. If it fails, all the philosophical explanations in the world won't make it true. I started testing everything. The traditional sidekick, tested it against boxers, wrestlers, street fighters. The classical blocks, pressure tested them at full speed, full power. The meditation techniques, evaluated their effect on actual combat performance. What survived wasn't always pretty, wasn't always elegant, but it was real. This approach made me many enemies in the martial arts world. They said I was disrespecting tradition. But I asked them, what serves the student better? Preserving a technique that fails in reality, or evolving it into something that actually works? They chose preservation. I chose evolution. Let me give you a concrete example. Traditional Wing Chun teaches a vertical punch. Everyone said changing it was heresy. So I tested both versions, vertical and horizontal, measuring speed, penetration, power. I filmed it, analyzed it, tested it against different opponents. The results didn't care about tradition. They showed clear advantages and disadvantages of each method. This commitment to functional truth transformed how I trained, how I fought, and ultimately, how I lived. Every aspect of my life became subject to this simple question. Does it work in reality? Not in theory, not in controlled conditions, but in the chaos of real life. I developed 3 rules for functional truth. 1. Test everything under resistance. 2. Measure results, not intentions. 3. Be willing to discard what fails no matter how long you've practiced it. This isn't just about fighting. It's about stripping away illusion to find what's real. In my film work, I applied the same principle. Fight scenes had to be functional, not just looking good, but showing real combat principles. Training had to be functional, not just making you sweat, but actually improving your capabilities. The most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves about what works and what doesn't. Functional truth demands brutal honesty. It means admitting when your favorite technique fails, It means acknowledging when your deeply held beliefs don't match reality. But this honesty, this commitment to what actually works, that's the foundation of true mastery. Here's a truth that most people never grasp. Your greatest limitations aren't physical. They're mental barriers disguised as physical ones. When someone says, "That's impossible," they're really saying, "I can't imagine how that's possible." I faced this constantly in my own journey. When I started teaching Caucasians in America, the martial arts community said it was forbidden. "You can't teach outsiders," they said. But what was this limitation really? Not a physical barrier, a mental cage built from prejudice and tradition. Let me share something that changed my entire perspective on limitations. In my early training, everyone said a martial artist couldn't build too much muscle. It would make you slow, inflexible, bulky. I questioned this. Why not? What's the actual mechanism that makes this true? When I couldn't find a legitimate answer, I developed my own strength training system. The result? I built a powerful physique while maintaining explosive speed. The limitation wasn't real. It was just an accepted myth. This taught me to categorize limitations into 3 types. 1. Real physical limitations, like the structural limits of human joints. 2. Current limitations, skills or abilities you haven't developed yet. 3. Imaginary limitations, pure mental constructs with no basis in reality. Most people never learn to distinguish between these. They treat every limitation as if it's a real physical limitation. But here's the crucial insight. 90% of what people call limitations fall into that 3rd category. Pure mental constructs. Take the traditional belief that you couldn't combine different martial arts styles. You must master one style before learning another, they said. Why? What law of physics makes this true? None. It was a mental limitation masquerading as wisdom. I broke through it by creating Jeet Kune Do, proving you could synthesize different approaches into something more effective. The process of transcending limitations isn't just about breaking rules. It's about understanding why those rules exist in the first place. When I developed the 1-inch punch, people said it was impossible to generate that much power in such a short distance. Instead of accepting this, I studied physics, biomechanics, and kinetic chains. I didn't just break the limitation. I understood why it was never really a limitation at all. This extends beyond physical technique. In film, they said an Asian man couldn't be a leading Hollywood star. Was this a real limitation? No. It was a social construct, a mental barrier. Breaking it wasn't about physical ability. It was about refusing to accept artificial constraints. Here's my method for transcending limitations. 1. When you encounter a limitation, ask, who says this is impossible? Second question, what evidence supports this supposed limitation? Third, break down the limitation into its components. Fourth, test each component systematically. 5. Replace accepted wisdom with proven results. The most dangerous limitations are the ones you accept without questioning. Every time someone says this is the limit, treat it as a hypothesis to be tested, not a truth to be accepted. That's how boundaries get broken. That's how progress happens. Remember this. The physical world has laws that must be respected. But most limitations, they're just stories we tell ourselves. And the moment you realize that, you gain the power to write a new story. I'm going to share a breakthrough moment that revolutionized martial arts stance work forever. In 1967, I was demonstrating the traditional Wing Chun stance to a student. Perfect root, perfect structure. Everything my teachers had taught me. Then my student asked one simple question that changed everything. What happens if your opponent is faster than you? This question triggered a complete dissection of traditional stance work. In Wing Chun, like many classical styles, we were taught to root ourselves firmly, the idea being that a stable foundation generates maximum power. Sounds logical, right? But I started seeing problems. First problem, combat isn't static. In real fights, you're dealing with constant movement, angle changes, rapid transitions. A rooted stance is like planting a tree. Great for staying in one place. Terrible for adapting to chaos. I began filming real fights, analyzing movement patterns. Know what I discovered? Nobody, not a single person, maintained those perfect traditional stances in actual combat. I broke down the conventional wisdom, stay rooted for power. But what generates more power? A planted foot or explosive movement. Stable stance prevents takedowns. But what prevents takedowns better? Being unmovable or being unavailable. Traditional stance maintains balance, but isn't dynamic balance more crucial than static balance? This led to intense experimentation. I started measuring power generation from different stance positions. Traditional stance with full root, 100% power, but took 0.8 seconds to generate. Modified, mobile, stance, 95% power, but only 0.3 seconds to generate. The mathematics of combat became clear, that 5% power loss was nothing compared to the 62% increase in delivery speed. But here's where it gets interesting. I discovered that the real problem wasn't the stance itself. It was our fundamental misconception about what a stance should do. We weren't looking for stability or mobility. We were looking for something I call adaptive foundation. I developed a new approach based on 3 principles. 1. Rootless root. Maintain structure without being structurally bound. 2. Mobile foundation. Generate power through movement rather than stability. 3rd. Tactical adaptation. Change your base instantly based on combat requirements. This led to revolutionary techniques, the pendulum stance, constant weight shifting for immediate directional change. The floating root, maintaining power generation while in transition. The spring-loaded base, using ground reaction force dynamically. The traditional masters said this approach would never work. You need strong roots, they insisted. So I demonstrated. I took on multiple attackers, showing how this new dynamic stance work allowed for instant adaptation. The results spoke for themselves. More speed, better angle creation, superior power generation through motion. This wasn't just about changing a stance. It was about changing how we think about human movement in combat. The traditional stance wasn't wrong. It was incomplete. By questioning the fundamental assumptions about rooting, we didn't just improve the stance. We evolved our understanding of combat movement itself. And here's the ultimate validation. Watch any high-level martial artist today. Their stance work is dynamic, adaptive, fluid. They're not bound by rigid traditional positions. They've all, knowingly or not, embraced this principle of adaptive foundation over rigid rooting. That's not just evolution. That's revolution. The traditional martial arts world had it backwards. They believed mastery meant accumulating. More techniques, more forms, more styles. I discovered something revolutionary. True mastery isn't about adding. It's about subtracting until you uncover what's essential. Let me show you the exact moment this hit me. In 1965, I had mastered over 300 traditional Wing Chun techniques. I could perform them all perfectly. Then I got into a real fight. Guess how many of those techniques I actually used? 4. Just 4. That was my awakening. I realized we weren't learning, we were collecting. So I developed what I call the subtraction method of learning. Instead of asking, what more can I add? I asked, what can I remove without losing effectiveness? This drove the traditional masters crazy. They'd spent decades building their systems by addition. I was tearing everything down to its core. Here's how the subtraction method works. First, you identify the outcome you want. Let's say it's knock out your opponent. Traditional learning says, learn 50 different ways to do it. My approach, find the 3 most efficient ways and master them completely. But here's the crucial part. You don't just pick 3 randomly. You test everything, eliminate what's unnecessary, and keep only what proves essential. I applied this to my own training. Started with 300 techniques, cut them to 200, then 100, then 50. Every cut required brutal honesty. Every elimination was tested in real combat conditions. Eventually, I got down to about 20 core techniques. But here's what people don't understand. Those 20 weren't just random survivors. They were the essential building blocks that could generate infinite combinations. This revolutionized how I taught. Traditional schools made students learn new techniques for years. I reversed it. First year, learn everything. Second year, start eliminating. Third year, keep eliminating. Success wasn't measured by how much you knew, but by how much you could eliminate while maintaining effectiveness. Let me give you a concrete example. Traditional kick training. Learn 16 different kicks. Practice them all equally. My method. Master the side kick and front kick until they're perfect. Why? Because analysis showed these 2 kicks could cover 95% of kicking situations. The other 14 kicks, they were just variations that actually slowed down learning. Think about this. In traditional learning, a student spends 1,000 hours trying to master 16 kicks. In my system, they spend those same 1,000 hours mastering 2 kicks. Who do you think has more effective kicks in a real fight? But this isn't just about martial arts. This is about how we approach learning itself. In filmmaking, they said I needed to learn hundreds of traditional acting expressions. Instead, I stripped it down to the essential emotions that connect with the audience. In business, they said I needed to understand complex marketing strategies. Instead, I focused on the core principle. Give people what they actually want, not what tradition says they should want. The hardest part of this revolution? Letting go. Everyone wants to add to their knowledge. Few have the courage to subtract. But here's the truth I discovered. Understanding isn't about accumulation. It's about elimination. It's about hacking away at the unessential until you find the core truth. Remember this. The world will try to convince you that more is better. More knowledge, more techniques, more complexity. But true mastery is about finding the essential and discarding everything else. That's not just learning, that's liberation. The principles I discovered in martial arts aren't just abstract theories. They're universal tools for breaking barriers. Let me show you how I applied them to revolutionize 3 completely different worlds: film, business, and personal relationships. First, the film industry. Hollywood in the 1960s had rigid rules about how Asian actors should be portrayed. Submissive, weak, speaking broken English. They said I had to follow these rules to succeed. Instead, I applied my principle of questioning everything. Why do Asian actors have to play stereotypes? What's the real source of audience connection? I analyzed every successful film star's appeal, stripped away the cultural decorations, found the core elements: authenticity, strength, charisma. In Enter the Dragon, I didn't just break martial arts conventions. I shattered Hollywood's entire approach to action films. No more fake fights with obvious choreography. I brought real combat principles to the screen. Every movement had to have authentic power, real purpose. The studios said audiences wouldn't understand. But I applied my functional truth principle. Test everything in reality. We screened rough cuts to real audiences. Their reaction? They didn't need to understand martial arts philosophy. They could feel the authenticity of real combat translated to film. This completely revolutionized action cinema. Look at any major action film today. They're still using principles I introduced. In business, I faced different challenges. The martial arts business model was fixed. Traditional school, fixed curriculum, long-term contracts. I stripped this down to its essentials. What does a student really need? Not a fancy school. They need real skill. Not a rigid curriculum. They need practical results. I created a business model based on effectiveness, not tradition. Traditional schools were charging people to memorize forms. I charged them to forget forms and find themselves. They said this would fail. Who'd pay to learn less instead of more? But I applied the same principle of functional truth. Results speak louder than tradition. My schools succeeded because we delivered real, measurable progress. But perhaps the most profound application was in personal relationships. Traditional Chinese culture had strict rules about hierarchy, respect, who you could teach, who you could learn from. I stripped away these artificial barriers. Started asking, what makes a relationship authentic? What's the essential truth in human connection? I discovered something revolutionary. The same principles that made martial arts effective made relationships powerful. Directness over formality. Honest feedback over polite pretense. Testing ideas in reality instead of clinging to assumptions. When I married Linda, people opposed our interracial marriage. But we applied these principles. Test reality. Question assumptions. Focus on what's essential. Love, understanding, mutual growth. This approach transformed every relationship in my life. With my children, I didn't force them into traditional roles. Instead, I taught them to question, to test, to find their own truth. With my students, I broke the traditional master-student barrier, made it a relationship of mutual discovery instead of hierarchy. The ultimate proof of these principles? They work across all boundaries: cultural, professional, personal. In film, they created a new genre of authentic action cinema. In business, they built a revolutionary approach to martial arts instruction. In relationships, they broke down barriers that people thought were unbreakable. Remember this: any principle that's truly true doesn't just work in one area, it works everywhere. The key is having the courage to apply it, to test it, to trust in reality over tradition. That's how you transform not just yourself, but the world around you. Most people think in terms of opposites: hard or soft, strong or flexible, traditional or modern. This kind of thinking creates artificial barriers. I discovered something far more powerful: the integration of opposites. Not choosing between them, but transcending the very idea that they're separate. Let me show you how I discovered this. In 1964, I was training with a heavyweight boxer. He had pure strength. I had pure speed. Traditional thinking said you had to choose one or the other. But during our exchange, I had a revelation. What if strength and speed weren't opposites, but complementary aspects of the same thing? Explosive power. I began experimenting. Instead of training strength one day and flexibility another, I developed exercises that demanded both simultaneously. Take the 1-inch punch. Everyone focuses on the power, but they miss the real innovation. It works because it integrates opposing forces, relaxation and tension, softness and hardness, stillness and explosion. Here's the framework I developed for integrating opposites. First level, recognition. Identify the seemingly opposing forces. Understand why they appear to conflict. Find the hidden connections between them. Second level, harmonization. Discover how each force enhances the other. Create conditions where both can exist simultaneously. Build bridges between apparent contradictions. Final level, transcendence. Move beyond seeing them as separate forces. Understand them as expressions of the same principle. Develop techniques that embody both simultaneously. I applied this to everything. In combat, people thought you had to choose between being a striker or a grappler. I showed how these weren't opposites, but complementary aspects of complete combat. A punch isn't just about striking. It's about combining forward force and rootedness, expansion and contraction, power and control. Here's a practical example. Traditional martial arts taught that you should either be totally committed to an attack or totally committed to defense. I proved this was false thinking. Every attack contains elements of defense. Every defense contains elements of attack. By understanding this, I developed techniques that were simultaneously both. This integration transformed everything. In training, instead of choosing between strength training and martial technique, I created methods that developed both simultaneously. People said you couldn't build muscle and maintain flexibility. I proved you could enhance both together through proper understanding. The ultimate expression of this was Jeet Kune Do. It wasn't about collecting different styles. It was about transcending the very concept of style by understanding the unity of all combat. Every technique contains its opposite. Every strength implies a weakness. Every weakness suggests a strength. Let me demonstrate this principle through movement. A rigid tree breaks in the storm, while a flexible reed survives. But true mastery isn't about choosing flexibility over rigidity. It's about being like water. Water can be soft enough to flow around obstacles, or hard enough to tear through rock. Not by choosing between states, but by embodying both simultaneously. This isn't mystical philosophy. It's practical reality. When you truly understand integration, you stop seeing opposites. You see opportunities. Every limitation becomes a potential advantage. Every weakness suggests its own solution. This isn't just theory. It's the foundation of true adaptability. The most dangerous trap in martial arts, in life itself, is the illusion of having to choose between false opposites. Strong or fast, traditional or innovative, disciplined or creative. The truth? These aren't choices at all. They're artificial boundaries created by limited thinking. Break these mental barriers, and you discover that true power lies not in choosing between opposites, but in transcending the very idea that they're separate at all. Most people completely misunderstand simplicity. They think it means being basic, starting with the simple and staying there. I discovered something far more profound. True simplicity only emerges after you've mastered complexity. Let me share a pivotal moment in my understanding. Early in my training, I knew over 200 ways to block a punch. I could demonstrate each one perfectly. But in actual combat, under real pressure, all that complexity fell apart. This wasn't just about techniques. It was about the fundamental nature of mastery itself. I began to map out the evolution of skill. Stage 1, simple ignorance. A few basic moves. Stage 2, collected complexity. You gather hundreds of techniques. Stage 3, functional complexity. You can use many techniques effectively. Stage 4, essential simplicity. You distill everything to its core. Stage 5, dynamic simplicity. You express maximum effect with minimum effort. Most martial artists never make it past stage 3. They get trapped in functional complexity, mistaking quantity for quality. But true mastery, that lies in stages 4 and 5. Let me show you how this works. Take the simple act of intercepting an attack. A beginner learns basic blocks. An intermediate practitioner learns dozens of variations. An advanced student masters complex combinations. But at the highest level, you return to simplicity, but not the simplicity of ignorance. This is the simplicity of deep understanding. I discovered 3 principles of essential simplicity. 1. Complexity must precede simplicity. I studied every major martial art, learned their techniques, understood their principles, not to collect them, but to see through them. Only by understanding the complexity could I identify what was truly essential. 2. Efficiency reveals. Essence. Under pressure, complexity crumbles. What remains? The essential. I tested techniques under increasing pressure until only the most efficient survived. This wasn't theory. This was combat laboratory work. 3rd, dynamic reduction. True simplicity isn't static. It's alive, adaptive. I developed techniques that could respond to any situation not by having many options, but by having essential options that could adapt dynamically. Here's a concrete example. The traditional Wing Chun system has 108 movements in its first form. I broke this down, analyzed each movement, tested them under pressure. Know what I found? The entire form could be reduced to 6 essential movements. Not because the others were wrong, but because these 6 contained the essence of all 108. This wasn't about making things easier. It was about making them more effective. In real combat, you don't have time for complexity. You need movements that work under any condition, against any opponent. This demands simplicity, but not simple simplicity, essential simplicity. I applied this to everything. In film fights, instead of complex choreography, I showed real combat principles. Simple, direct, effective. Critics said it wouldn't work. Audiences proved them wrong. They connected with the truth of essential movement. The hardest part? You can't skip the complexity phase. You must understand complexity to transcend it. Every great innovation I made came from first mastering the complex, then distilling it to its essence. Whether it was developing new training methods, creating fight scenes, or teaching students, the process was always the same. Understand everything. Keep what's essential. Discard the rest. Remember this. True simplicity is the highest achievement of mastery. Not because it's easy, but because it contains within it all the lessons of complexity, refined to their purest form. That's not reduction. That's evolution. Most martial artists hit a plateau and stay there. They reach a level of skill, get comfortable, and stop growing. That's not just stagnation. It's death. I discovered that true mastery requires perpetual innovation, constant evolution. Not just adapting to change, but actively creating it. I made a shocking discovery in 1967. I was at my physical peak. My techniques were sharp. Everyone called me a master. And that's exactly when I realized I was in the greatest danger. Not from external opponents, but from the deadliest enemy: satisfaction. Contentment with your current level is a master's greatest threat. So I developed what I call the continuous revolution method. Phase 1, deliberate disruption. Every month, I would intentionally break my own patterns, change my training schedule, alter my techniques, question my best moves. Most people thought this was crazy. Why change what works? They asked. But that's exactly when you must change, when everything is working perfectly. Let me show you how this works. I had perfected my sidekick. It was fast, powerful, efficient. Instead of being satisfied, I broke it down completely, changed the angle, modified the power generation, questioned every aspect I thought I had mastered. The result? A completely new understanding of kicking mechanics. Phase 2, systematic innovation. I created a 3-step process for constant evolution. 1, identify your current limitations. 2, design experiments to break through them. 3rd, test and refine the results. But here's the crucial part. You don't wait for limitations to become obvious. You actively search for them. Every success becomes a signal to push further. Every mastered technique becomes a challenge to evolve beyond it. I applied this to everything. In my training, I never did the same workout twice. Not because variety is interesting, but because patterns are dangerous. They create comfort zones, and comfort zones create plateaus. Phase 3, knowledge challenge system. Every week, I would take my strongest beliefs about martial arts and try to prove them wrong. Not just superficially, I would genuinely attempt to disprove my own understanding. This isn't comfortable. It's not supposed to be. Growth happens at the edge of discomfort. Here's an example. I believed speed was paramount in combat. Instead of reinforcing this belief, I spent months trying to prove it wrong. I worked with wrestlers, boxers, anyone who could challenge this assumption. This led to revolutionary insights about the relationship between speed and timing. The 4th phase, and this is crucial, is what I call revolutionary integration. Take every innovation, every discovery, and force it to prove itself against your existing knowledge. Not to replace the old, but to evolve beyond it. Most people misunderstand innovation. They think it's about creating something new. But true innovation is about transcending the boundary between old and new. It's not about discarding the past. It's about using it as a foundation for evolution. I developed specific tools for perpetual growth. The monthly challenge. Master a completely new skill. The reverse perspective. Approach your art from your opponent's view. The knowledge inversion. Take what you know and deliberately do the opposite. This isn't just about martial arts. This is about the fundamental nature of growth itself. In my films, I constantly pushed the boundaries of what was possible. In my teaching, I evolved my methods with every student. In my personal development, I never allowed myself to settle into comfortable patterns. Remember this. The moment you think you've mastered something is the moment you begin to lose it. True mastery isn't a destination. It's a constant journey of innovation. The greatest battle isn't against external opponents. It's against the comfort of knowledge, the satisfaction of achievement, the plateau of mastery. Break these chains, and true evolution becomes possible. The martial arts world is full of philosophers who can't fight, and fighters who can't think. The greatest challenge isn't mastering either thought or action. it's unifying them. This isn't abstract theory. Let me show you exactly how I bridged this gap. I discovered this truth in a crucial moment. 1969. I was explaining combat theory to a student for an hour. He understood everything intellectually. Then we sparred. Nothing he understood made it into his movement. That's when I realized knowing and doing aren't separate activities. They must become one. Here's my method for unifying thought and action. First, instantaneous testing. Every idea must be tested the moment it's conceived. Not later, not tomorrow, now. When I developed a new concept about angular attacks, I wouldn't just think it through. I'd immediately get up, move, test it against different opponents. The gap between thought and action had to be zero. Second, physical philosophy. I developed a practice I called thinking with the body. Instead of separating mental and physical training, I combined them. Every physical movement had to express a principle. Every principle had to manifest in movement. When I taught the concept of interception, I wouldn't just explain it. I'd make students feel it, experience it, embody it. Here's a concrete example. The principle of non-telegraphic movement. Instead of just understanding it mentally, I created specific drills where students had to throw punches while watching themselves in mirrors. Theory and practice unified in real time. Thought becoming action, action refining thought. Most crucial, the reality check system. 1. State your understanding clearly. 2. Demonstrate it physically immediately. 3rd, test it under pressure instantly. 4. Refine both understanding and execution simultaneously. This approach transformed my teaching. No more long theoretical discussions without immediate physical application. No more physical training without clear philosophical understanding. Every session became a unity of mind and body, thought and action. Remember this. Understanding without application is just philosophy. Application without understanding is just movement. True mastery is when they become one inseparable reality. That's not just martial arts. That's life itself. Personal development isn't something that happens to you. It's something you architect with absolute precision. Let me show you how I engineered my own evolution. Not just as a martial artist, but as a human being. Most people approach personal growth passively, waiting for experience to change them. I discovered something different. You can design your mental evolution with the same precision you design your physical training. Here's the system I developed. First, the architecture of thought. I created what I call mental training blocks. Each morning, I would select one specific aspect of thinking to develop. One day, it might be instantaneous decision-making. Another day, emotional control under pressure. Another, strategic thinking in chaos. Each aspect received the same focused attention I gave to physical techniques. Example. To develop instantaneous decision-making, I created specific scenarios where I had to respond to multiple attackers. But here's the crucial part. I wouldn't just react physically. I had to articulate my thought process before, during, and after each response. This wasn't just training reactions, it was training the mind to process and decide with increasing speed. Second, disciplined practice methodology. 1. Morning mental preparation. 15 minutes of focused breathing. Review of daily mental objectives. Visualization of perfect execution. 2. Active integration. Throughout day, constant awareness of thought patterns. Immediate correction of mental mistakes. Real-time application of daily focus. third evening analysis, detailed review of mental performance, documentation of insights, strategic planning for next day's growth. The key discovery was this: mental discipline isn't